Hello. I want to talk about REST some more. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from this book. You can access it in the library, then O'Reilly online. This is REST API Design Rule Book. K isn't looking so good there. Rule Book by Mark Maas. REST is an acronym standing for Representational State Transfer. I think big thing is it's just REST now. And what's really the idea here? The idea was Roy Felding created this. He was seen in the I'd say late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere in there. Concern that maybe if people didn't build and maintain and grow the web appropriately, it would have problems, and we would sort of see things that we would limit the growth of the web, and we wouldn't have a lot of success. And so he looked at what was being good about the way the web was that was allowing it to really grow and to be a successful thing. And he captured this in basically a description of an architectural style that this is the way that you should build your web apps so that we can keep the web growing and working well. And so this architectural style, there were several parts to it. And I'm just going to quickly read through this. Because I know that it's not something that you're like, oh, I want to learn and memorize it, but you should hear it briefly. So architectural style, everything is client server based, and we've talked about that. A big thing was this notion of a uniform interface. And so this really was the idea that all the clients and all the servers all talk basically the same protocol, the same language, same sort of way of dealing with each other. That way it's all able to interoperate. We wouldn't have this notion of, oh, only the Facebook app can talk to Facebook. And there's no interoperation then between what you're doing on the client and with the server and other servers and other clients. No, everyone has to install, a native client to talk to the server of their choice. What would be the result of that, actually? You think about it. You probably visit hundreds and hundreds of different websites sometimes in some sessions when you're searching for information. And now, yeah, you would have to go, download the app, download the app, download the app. There's an app for that. Well, that's stupid. Sorry. Yeah, so this was this belief that we don't want these unique client apps that prevent us from being able to have everything interoperate. It needed to be a layered system. The big thing there was from a networking standpoint to be able to put in caches and gateways and stuff. Yes, all this notion about caching had to be very explicit so that in the system, because it's a big web, that we knew what was allowed to be cached and for how long. So that's built into a lot of web apps. You may have heard of things known as content delivery networks, or you may not have, but they're behind the scenes, and they allow companies like Google and Facebook to have content be originally served, let's say, from California, but cached near to us where we are located, so things run really fast. Overall, and we have caching throughout the entire system. Your web browser stores all sorts of images and other stuff. So if they don't change, it can just get them from your local machine rather than pull them over the network, which is slow. Yeah, everything had to be stateless. We needed to keep to that, and sort of an optional thing, but this idea that you could have code on demand so that a server could send code to the client and the client could run it. The original things there were things like Flash and maybe Java. But the reality is what we do now, we largely send JavaScript that runs in the browser, and it was able to do lots of stuff there. REST. REST is all about coming up with these application programming interfaces for the servers that then we talk to with our client browsers. And so a REST API, a big mindset of them was to say, you need to think about designing your application as all about managing resources. Okay, and Masse, or however we say his last name, he says, you know, a resource is, quote, any web-based concept. By the way, any web-based concept sounds like almost anything to me. So you really should. You should let this be a feeling that it can. I can call just about anything I want a resource. I'm going to call that a resource, okay? Such that, you know, to function as one, though, it has to be able to be referenced by a unique identifier and manipulated via the uniform interface. And that's when I was talking about earlier, this idea that all the clients and the servers should basically talk the same sort of language. He came up with a set of 4 constraints for this uniform interface that we would have on the web. Again, I don't want to write all this down. I just want to talk really quickly through it. That you should have this identification of resources. And so the unique identifier, this is our URI, our uniform resource identifier. So everything has to have a unique way, a unique string that we can say we can go and we can find it, we can access it on the web. We can manipulate these resources via representations. So basically we could bundle things up and send back data, and it would be the whole thing. We could actually ship these things around, and we can, you know, it's basically, you know, we post things with the form, we get things back. We can have JSON objects. We haven't dealt with them in this course, but there's all sorts of ways but basically to say, yeah, we can actually sort of ship the resources back and forth between client and server. When talking and making requests, they would be self-descriptive, which means everything in the request that's necessary for processing it is there in the request. It doesn't require some sort of knowledge outside of the request. And this really speaks back to the stateless nature, because that's what we need for statelessness. We need to be able to get a complete request with everything that we can process as part of that request. And then finally was, yeah, you needed to be sure that you were actually supporting hypermedia. And what is hypermedia? Hypermedia means that we can link from one thing to another thing. So you needed to have support for this linking between whether, you know, no matter what way you're doing representation of objects and stuff, there needs to be some way to link one thing to another thing. All right, so let's move on now. And let's talk about those uniform resource identifiers, because you know you need to deal with them when you make up your routes and stuff. And you've already been working on, you've already submitted at this stage part 1 of the project. And so you've already come up with some routes, but so we're just going to go over some general guidelines here. I'm guessing you're not really going to have to change many of your routes. You might not have to change any of them. You might have them all good. But let's talk about some things. This is general overall like advice on programming and so forth and so on. So uniform resource identifiers. The big idea between the URI, and I've said in an earlier lecture, oh, let's just call them URLs. We should really call them URIs. Anyways, the meaning of a URI stays the same over time. And a big thing here is that it uniquely identifies a resource on the web. So for a given resource, there should be only one. This URI, if I have a URI, that gives me a unique identification of the resource. And they need to stay this way. Like if I've got this URI and I come back to it a year later, it should mean the same thing. The meanings shouldn't change on me. So let's go over some rules for good URI design. Since this is a big part of coming up with your RESTful designs, what are some of these rules? The first one is that the forward slash, and forward slash is that. By the way, we tend to just call the forward slash the slash. It's the backslash, the one that goes that way, that's called the backslash. All right, forward slash is used to denote hierarchical relationships. In other words, if you're going to use a slash, it better be because you are trying to convey that something is some sort of hierarchy. Okay, so let's say we have an example here. We make http www.university.ca/buildings/Carl Pollock Hall /rooms/3681. All right. So the big thing here is these buildings and the rooms. So rooms are beneath the buildings. So this is a sort of a higher level thing in the hierarchy. And in fact, this is all the buildings, a particular building. And then in this particular building, we have rooms, and in that, with a particular room in that building. Okay? So the slashes tell us, oh yeah, as I go through this, these are lower in a hierarchy and this is higher in the hierarchy. And this comes from the notion of what these slashes originated from with regard to file systems. And so, it's like a folder, and inside of the folder I have a document, so forth and so on, okay? So I think the idea with this is don't use your slashes willy-nilly, Their slashes are to mean something. And so, sure, you could just do whatever you want. But if you do just whatever you want, it eventually is going to lead to probably some design drawbacks for yourself. You're going to wish you hadn't done that. Or people are going to be like, why are you doing? Why aren't you speaking our language? So don't put a slash at the end of a URI. All right. And 3, no underscores. Why is this? It's just that they're hard to read. When you use them in various editors, the editors recognize, oh yeah, you have a URI here, and it tries to underline it to click on it, and now it's hard to read with the underscores. You should, when you write them, you should prefer lowercase. So these are just some basic things. And then with regard, another thing to note, and it's just, I'll put this here, is that as we remove parts of the URI, we get different resources. So in other words, these slashes, by the way, should basically tell us what we have available potentially. So when we had /buildings / Carl Pollock Hall, and we just do rooms, this really should be, and again, I'm leaving off the beginning part of the URI, but this also is a resource. So I got rid of the /3681, but this is a resource. And likewise, if I get rid of this, this is another resource. And if I get rid of this, this is another resource. So in general, we should pile up our resources so that, yes, it's in a hierarchical fashion, but also so that it means something as we pull stuff. If we pull something away with one of that's for the slash, we should be often left, we should really be aiming to be left with something that's still a good, meaningful resource. These are just general guidelines, of course. It's all rules that can be violated if necessary. Well, not all rules can be violated, but a lot of them. Now, so everything's about resources. Let's talk about that there are actually 4 types of resources. And when you're doing the design and you're going to pick a type for your resource, you should keep it that way. You shouldn't change it over time, or you shouldn't mix it. So there are what are known as document resources. There are collection resources. There are store resources and controller resources. And a heads up, this does not mean controller as in the controller in our Ruby in Rails. It's you're going to reuse this word. It's for a similar meaning, but it's not the same thing, okay? So we can have a document resource, collection resource, store resource, controller resource. So let's talk about each of these in turn now. So document resource. This is, the way to think about it is that this is the equivalent to a database entity. So it's singular, so it's like the row in the database, a row in a table. All right, so it's like a single book. Okay, we could have that as a document resource. A collection resource. This is a server managed collection of resources. These would be document, by the way, in all the cases I can see and think of. But maybe I'm wrong, but in general, the idea is that a collection resource holds in it a bunch of document resources. So it's like I had on the previous page. Buildings is a collection resource, and then the Carl Pollock Hall is an actual document. It's a single thing. It would represent a single building inside of that collection. All right. And so this is like the whole table in the database. Okay. So now a client can add in resources, but they're controlled and managed by the server. And so you might ask for, oh, I want to make a new book. I want to make a new building. But if you don't, the server can determine whether or not it will accept and allow your new creation of that resource, that document resource. A store resource is highly related to a collection, but this time it's a client-managed collection. And basically the client gets to say, here I have something, store it. And here is its URI as well. I want you to, it's an identifier for it. I want you to use this. And when I use that identifier again, I want to be able to get it back out from you. I'm not sure where we use these very much. In all the Rails work that we're doing, we've definitely got lots of document resources and lots of collection resources, but we do not, I've not seen us use store resources much. But you should know that they are considered an official one, and they exist. Controller resource. So this is basically a resource that can change other resources or manipulate them. Now, what does that really mean? This means this is a procedure. Okay. And so we can have a resource that when we call it, it goes and does something for us on the server. Okay. And in particular, this is for actions or methods or whatever that do not fit CRUD. So create, retrieve, update, and delete. We have all sorts of good ways of specifying them. We are not going to make controller resources to create, retrieve, update, and delete. But for example, you might have something that was an example that is given in the book, is you could post to alerts. That would be the collection. And then, maybe you have an ID. So that's the actual document. So it's alert 1, 2, 3, 4. And we need to request to the server, we want it to be sent again, resend that alert, whatever it means to send it out, do it again. And so we could make this request and the server would go and take that action. And so that's not really a create, retrieve, update, or delete. And so it's like, we want you to do this thing. And so that's an example of a controller resource. So just as we had some rules to guide us with our URIs, let's have some rules to guide us with the design of resources. Again, these come from the Mark Massey book. We want to use the singular name or document resources. Okay. If we're going to be using a string and not a numeric identifier. So again, we've seen a lot of numeric IDs used in our Rails apps, but that example I had with like Carl Pollock Hall, that's not a numeric ID from the database, clearly. But it's in a singular form. All right. So if you're going to be going to give them individual names, they should be singular. But of course, often we're going to see them with numeric IDs. More important is to be using a plural noun for collections, for collections and stores. So when our resource, we have a collection resource or a store resource, use a plural. So that's like when we used buildings, okay? 3, use a verb or verb phrase for the controller names. So this is not the controller name inside of your Rails app, but this is the controller resource. So again, like resend, that's a verb, okay? 4, do not use the CRUD function names for in the URI. So we're going to want to do something like we delete. So this is our HTTP request to, let's say we have some lists. We want to get rid of number 32. We do not want to do something where we make a request to do stuff like this. Lists 32/delete. Because we already have verbs through our HTTP verbs to be able to do this. So we shouldn't be sticking them in here. So for creating, we're posting. For retrieving, we're getting. For updating, we're patching. And for deleting, we're deleting. Okay? Don't just, oh, I'm just going to use a bunch of posts and gets and then stick other words in. Use the verbs as appropriate, okay? And then 5, when you've got a query string, its purpose is to filter or paginate collection and store resources. Basically, you should restrict your usage of the query string for this sort of purpose, is what he's trying to say. So you would say, if I got this collection of lists, maybe I want to only see the ones that have been labeled as done. And so I'm going to use this to filter this from all of the lists or something. I don't know. So maybe I should be, yeah, so I guess lists would, anyway, so we'll just move on. Or we had lists and maybe we've got lots of them. And so we can use this to instruct for pagination. So showing us all of them would be too much, but we could have it be broken up by pages and how many per page and so forth. So we could get them in bite-sized pieces, so to speak. All right. I'm going to end here and pick up in just a moment.